My name's Jeffrey Morgan. I'm a life changer. That little term I use for myself. There's a whole heap of complexity to it. Mental health expert, health and wellbeing consultant, personal trainer, nutritionist. But for me, obviously, I'm inspired to change and save lives and empower people to a better life. I was born here in New South Wales, so for me, young kid going through parents breaking up, through that little 0 to 8 years of age, and a lot of dysfunction within the family, a lot of arguments, domestic violence, drinking, gambling, exposure to that. As a young kid, I grew up in a house. I wouldn't say it was a house actually, I'd say it was a room out the back of a house, and the toilet was detached from that. My dad would go to work every day as a baker, leave me during the night by myself as a young kid, probably 6 years of age, pretty scary stuff. And I'd run out onto Redfern Street, Redfern, because the house came out onto that, and be screaming, asking where my dad was. And the old Lebanese lady that lived there would always come out and obviously bring me back into the house, and sometimes let me sleep on the lounge with herself. So a lot of people don't know that side of the story and how we grew up. It was just one room, and that one room I'd see, like when he'd leave home, I could not fall asleep. So that stuck with me for a long time. I'd pretty much stay up until I got so tired that I'd actually fall asleep. And to me that was, a sad way to start as a young kid in life. Young kids that age had the safety, security and stability within our own home, and for me I just felt, I don't know, something wasn't right compared to the other kids within my area, and it projected out into my life. When I was a kid, I loved both parents. Your parents are your parents and you love them to death, and I feel they gave me everything they could at the level they could now, understanding it. When I was a kid, I didn't understand it because my parents weren't both there. So I'd have my dad there and they'd literally kidnap me off one another. Mum would take me up to Walgett. For context, that's 8 hours out of Sydney. Dad would get me back. Mum would hide me in Dubbo. Then my dad would move me between place and place, and school, and that lack of structure sort of led to who I became. And I felt that it's sort of almost, I love traveling now, and I wonder if it was from those formative years where we traveled and moved so much that became a normal part of myself. And I just, it was crazy times, bro. Like, it was a sad time to know that my parents weren't in the one home together. 10 years of age, I was asked on Redfern Street, Redfern. I could show you the exact spot. That's how etched it is in my memory. Looking up at both my parents, asking me, what'd they do? Where do you want to live? And I was like, with you both. And they're like, no, you got to choose one of us. And having that, conversation with your parents shows the dysfunction within that relationship. And my childhood, they did their best. I look back on it now, they did their best with what they had. At the time, I beat up on that because I was like, you're not good enough, you don't love me, I don't matter, I'm not valued, you don't care for me. And the younger version of me was born because I wanted to be validated by somebody. Running away from home, Dad was abusive at the time, physically abusive every single day. And that was, now I look back on it, it's done me some great favors around discipline, but back then I didn't feel safe in my own home around my own father. And that's why, at 12, I ended up hang jumping out of the window of the first floor apartment and never looked back and went out onto the street. So it's just, 12-year-old kids are out playing with their toys or some other kids from their school and doing different things around being a 12-year-old kid. And here I was on the streets of Sydney because I was scared of my own father. And if I was scared of my own father, I had this perception that I couldn't trust anybody, because if I can't even trust my own family, I can't be near you. So I became isolated in this world as a 12-year-old kid, and the story was born. My biggest challenges then, finding a bed every night, to be honest with you, making money and not even thinking that I was stealing or doing something wrong. I just wanted to get a nice roof over my head, a nice warm bed, some food in the tummy, and like any 12-year-old kid would. And that was probably my biggest challenges at that point in time, and that was so consuming that I probably didn't have time for anything else, to be honest with you. Like, I'm not thinking goals, dreams, learning, being a better person, being me, just being me. I think I end up not being me, and validation from the people I started to hang around, the street kids, which led to graffiti, one of the most well-known graffiti artists. A lot of people don't know that. In Sydney at that point in time, headed up at what we called Partners in Crime, or PIC, spraying trains, and that was my identity then. I grabbed it because I didn't have identity with my parents, and that was my validation. And the more you spoke my name into existence, the more I wanted to live or reinforce or strengthen that name and be proud of it. It was something my father did teach me, so that's where it crossed over. I started to go, I'm disciplined, I can do this, and if you're going to do it at a gold medal standard. That was my dad's sort of mentality. Don't do something for the sake of doing it, be better than I was, be better than our family was. And he came across from Austria and didn't speak the language, gave it everything he had in Australia at that time, where there was a lot of racism around those that weren't Australian. Even if you weren't Indigenous Australian, that's the term that people would use. But for me, it's being Aboriginal, and that was Australian. So that's a whole different conversation. But I was in conflict of that, not knowing who I was as a proud Aboriginal man. Now, looking back at that kid, I was so disconnected from my own culture, disconnected from myself. Validation went out through everything else. What Eveleigh Street means to me now was my future was in my past. My past was Eveleigh Street. So that defined who I was. Jeffrey Morgan, Eveleigh Street, connection together, go to jail. I'm from Eveleigh Street. Wow, you're one of those boys. And it's same. We live by labels in this society. I'm a nutritionist, I'm an X, I'm a Y, I'm a Z. What if we built the greatest version of ourselves by knowing what you want from life? The elements you're not strong at, respect, values, morals, beliefs, we spoke about that before. And then you can really start to become the greatest version of yourself. And for me, the greatest version of me at that point in time as a young kid was Eveleigh Street. That no-go zone, bricks at police cars, riots with police, stolen cars, getting back into that area, bank robbers, armour guards. Like, that was totally normal. People would go for coffee today before business. We'd catch up and chat what bank was next, and it's just insane to even think that we were built that specific way, and more importantly that we thought that was normal. Just crazy. To me, like, growing up in Eveleigh Street, it was about fitting in, and I wanted to be a part of it, and without knowing, I just became a byproduct of the environment. So starting to learn how to survive, not thrive, which meant how do you hustle? And the street hustle is totally different. It's about making money any way you can. So for us, and for me especially, coming with my dad's standard, I said, I'm going to set a standard, and if I do something, and we went through these transitions, graffiti as a kid, then we started distracting shopkeepers, going out the back, taking money from the safes, locking it up, they wouldn't even know. So that searching culture was one of the first things I ever did, and I was someone who travelled across Australia really early on, and it was, to me, it was the pioneering of it all at the beginning. And we created that crew, Partners in Crime, that evolved into more a crime crew than it was a graffiti crew at one stage. Then we transitioned into ram raids. Ram raids become bank snatchers. So ram raids, we'd go into the city, and sometimes during the day, jewelry stores, whatever it may be, duty frees, smash in, grab what we could, take as much as we could, day or night, and then basically go out. The more the paper wrote about the community, the more the community loved it, right? And obviously for us, we were making money from it. In our eyes, we were thriving, not surviving, even though we were going to jail at that point in time. Bank snatches, which meant we just walked in, snatched money off the counter of a bank, people depositing that in, or the bank tellers counting that up, running out of the banks at that point in time. And then we got to a stage where we said, why don't we jump over the bank counter? And they said, do you think that's possible? I said, oh, I'll have a crack at it. And that's where it evolved into bank robberies. And obviously over time, the whole community got into bank robberies, armour guards. A lot of people that were well known and well respected in the criminal world came from our community because we had that standard, and people started to pass that on. You know, be in proximity of business and people will pass you on business tips. Be in proximity of millionaires, they'll pass you on millionaire tips. For us, we were passing on bank robber type tips or criminality tips, and we just become really good at it. Redfern, Glebe, Woolloomooloo, Waterloo, all those boys were in amongst one another and, you know, crossing over, and Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal kids, and we just end up forming relationships, business relationships, but on our own terms, and off we went, and that culture was born. And, you know, to this day I think back, and Spanian spoke about this recently, and it was more about the clothes we wear from those areas I mentioned. I was one of the first kids getting into a lot of this stuff. Cerruti, you know, people don't even wear that anymore, but in general, Sergio Tacchini, stuff that wasn't out there. I was massive on Lacoste as a kid. The Gant came in, Nautica came in, I'd wore a lot of that, and we went through that process of, you know, evolving it where kids across Australia now wear whatever you want to call it, hood get up, and to us that was, you know, that was just normal culture, brother. For me, the first time I went to an adult prison, I was in Mount Penang boys' homes. I walked past one of the boys, he shakes my hand, he's got two officers, one on each side of him. Hey Morgs, how you going? We exchange something at that point in time. I obviously know he's trying to dump that. I do the right thing at that point in time as a, you know, criminal or someone in that world. And I take that, I go back to the unit, they jump me, mate, he was searched up there, you've got it on yourself. Long story short, I go to court for it, I take the rap, sweet, not gonna say nothing, it's mine. When I get sentenced, the judge goes 3 months. I was like, oh, whatever, I'm in boys' home. Add it to the sentence I was already doing, 3 years for a bunch of bank snatches off those counters. And I end up walking back to the cell, and the officer says to me, you know where you're going, don't you? And I said, yeah, back to Mount Penang. He goes, no mate, when did you commit the offence? What age? And I said, when I was 18. He goes, you're going to Long Bay, mate. And I was like, are you serious? He goes, yeah. And I start asking around, you know, hey, am I going to Long Bay? And they go, yeah, you're on your way. So I go from boys' homes to Long Bay, serve the 3 months and come back. And yeah, you got to think about a young 18-year-old kid. As much as I knew everybody, such a daunting thing, and we can all puff our chest out and say, oh, first time I went to jail, I had no fear and I didn't care. Maybe because you were drugged up and your emotions weren't there or you weren't thinking. But for me, I was pretty clear-headed. I wasn't into drugs at that stage. And when I say I got into drugs eventually, it was more on a recreational side when I was 28. So I go there at 18, and then even then the 28-year period, when I was at 28, it was only a short period of time. But in general, when I went at 18, you know, the thoughts in my head as we drove from Gosford, I got sentenced at Gosford, which was where Mount Penang was, down to Sydney, about an hour and a half drive. Just trying to think what it looked like, what should I say, what will happen if someone starts me. You know, you can say all you want. First time you go to jail, you're thinking this stuff. Am I going to stand up? What if a big bloke comes at you? Those sorts of thoughts, you're running scenarios in your head, and it is daunting as a young kid. And as I said, that 12-year-old kid was in that van that day going, what if? And people have these what ifs in their lives, anxiety and fear comes up. No doubt was sitting within myself. And it was only when I got to the wing, I'd had a bit of a drama at the clinic. And then the bloke ended up on the ground, officer comes out, he goes, what happened here? I say, oh mate, I think that's why he came up the clinic, he's not well. I go back to the unit, the bloke's screaming out, wait till I see you in the morning, Morgan. And then two of my brothers like, which Morgan's this? And it ended up being two of my brothers. So when I heard their voices, I sort of had a relief that I was safe. And that bloke said, oh, don't worry about it, Morgan, we're all good. And, you know, but to me, if they weren't there, what would have happened? And where would I come out and I'm into it with this bloke and who knows what he's got. And so you can puff your chest out as much as you want, but jail's a daunting place. and especially from a young kid who was going from boys' homes to jail at that point in time. Very scary, very daunting. Even though I was from the hood, I puffed my chest out, I showed that I was Jeffrey Morgan, but underlying, no doubt I had a lot of nerves going on. So I served 1 year at one point in time for a car, stolen car that was chased across the Harbour Bridge. Then I served 5 years for a bank robbery. I served a couple of little remands in between that, 1 month, 3 months, something of that nature, got bail because there was no evidence. And then I served 7 years down in Melbourne for another bank robbery. When the judge first sentenced me to 7 years prison down in Melbourne, my last bank robbery, my last crime that I was convicted for, I was devastated. But I was sitting with a couple of mates that I'd grown up with, the same crew, the same bank robbery crew, and you just project bullshit. That's the reality. Do it standing on my head, I don't care, whatever, easy money, all of those sorts of bravado that you do within a group, especially in a group that you've grown up around for so long. I'll do it, just doesn't worry me. But realistically, I've left 2 kids behind. I was so conscious of that at that point in time. I started to really get a conscious around my kids. Started to really want to change my life, and I just was starting to get sick of the bullshit that was within that life. I was seeing people killed, people cheating on each other. Someone gets locked up and that person, their friend's sleeping with their girlfriend. And I was one of those people, I'll be honest with you, because we were just built wrong. And we just twisted because we wanted to treat old ladies well, even though we grew up in Eveleigh Street, funnily enough. But we had this twisted mentality. You do something to me, I'll do it back even worse to yourself. And we just built wrong. And going through that 7-year sentence and understanding when he read that out, I just said, let's make this 7-year sentence different. So I was conscious of that in the background. And then as I went through this trial prior to that, I'd ask the boys to come and chop me out and come and say I wasn't there, and they end up coming back with look, I've got to do what I've got to do for me. I respect you, I wish you all the best. And it sort of reinforced I wanted to get out, because if this is who I was relying on, and I mean that respectful to the boys that would ever hear this, I respect their choices, but at the same time it showed me I needed to make my choice and separate myself from that world. And the 7-year sentence, you walk down, I got sentenced, and I don't know if I got sentenced separate or what it was, but I'm pretty sure that I was sitting at one point in time and tears were just rolling down my eyes because I felt like the world had ended. And I was starting to contemplate whether you want to be around or not. And the other thing, I was in the slot at the time in Melbourne, which meant I was doing 3 months slot, nothing in that cell, and I was contemplating how I could do things in there, because obviously it's harder to do stuff. You don't have bars, or it's a lot harder to do something to yourself as such. And would you do that? And I had those conversations. I wouldn't say, it was more just helplessness, and you don't think there's any hope, and you think 7 years, you've wasted so much of your life. And that's how I perceived it. You wasted your life. And I went, wait a second, what did you learn from your life? And I started to get this little shoulder demon on my shoulder, or angel I should say, more so than the demon, got shoved aside. And for me, I just had that conversation, brother, where I looked at this person saying, you got more in you, and what is it? What do you want to do with your life? And that 3 months, the head noise, writing that out, journaling every single day, that's where I started to see the road out. I was like, wait, there's a different way. And when I walked out, I bumped into a professor from uni, wanted to do a uni degree, and it just, I don't know, things flowed, and the rest was history. My first child, Brianna, my daughter, was born when I was out, and I didn't even attend that because I was partying. And this is, this whole scene of thinking it's normal, crazy. My first kid ever, and I didn't attend the birth. And that's the truth, and that's how I was built at the time. And I don't know if the mother, probably upset by it too, even though we're both from the same community, the Aboriginal community. And I just look back on it, and it's sad that I didn't even have the value of being at my child's birth, I'd rather party. And you know, I look back on that and just sadness, man. It was terrible to think that I was built that way. I was there for the formative years, so I did give as much as I possibly could. I got locked up during that time, and yeah, she was probably about 5 years of age then, and I got locked up for those 5 years, but just prior I had split up with my partner, the mother to my first child, and I'd split up probably within a year of that, and within a year of splitting up I was serving 5 years for a bank robbery. So it wasn't a great start for my daughter, and it hasn't been, and it's been a hard relationship. And I mean that not from her side, like, look, you know, and this is the whole thing about being staunch and loyal to the boys. What about my daughter? What about my son? And I do my best now, and I live a blissful life and happy life around all those elements I spoke about. I'm continuously committed to that, even my kids, but it's a harder one. And it's, you know, they've carried that for a long time, and you're not going to just change that opinion about their father who didn't show up for them. Because I was that kid, and I understand where they're coming from. You didn't feel loved, cared for, valued and mattered. If anybody's in that relationship, no matter who that's with your parents, with your partner, with your workplace, you're not going to perform at your best or be in that space or want to be in that space. And it breaks my heart, because my kids do mean the world to me, and you know, it's something that I don't know how to explain it. Probably been tough here, but you know, you do suffer in silence, and that's one thing that hurts me underlying. Even though I talk to my daughter, there's times though it gets fractured and it goes back to no conversation. That kills me, and it's hard, because I didn't even know how to be a father, and I don't know what that means. And you know, now that she's older, it's hard to regain that fatherhood, I suppose, or that connection. And what do? Like, yeah, I'll go and see the grandkids, but you know, even with my workspace now, we're home 4 days out of 4 months. She's like, you got to come and see the kids, and I'm like, I'm never there. So it's just a real tough space at the moment, and that's just with my daughter, let alone my son. And my son, you know, my son just doesn't talk to me, and that kills me. Like, internally, it eats you inside. If it didn't eat you inside, you wouldn't be human. And I think that's the hardest thing, brother. Like, it's knowing that I want to give more, and I'd love to do things with them, whether it's just grab a feed, have a conversation, be around the grandkids, help them with their studies or life, but you just don't get to do it, and it's something I've missed out on. And yeah, everyone knows how much is that worth, priceless, right? So I create less stress in my life around all the other elements, and I feel like I'm at a really high level on each. But when it comes to my kids, it's something that pains me a lot, and it does hurt me. If there was a message I could tell my kids, I'd say, don't be me. And what that means is, when I was a kid, I didn't understand it. For them, they don't understand it. So they've got a judgment, and that's wired from how I treated them, which I totally understand. So it's a very complex conversation, how your brain works and all of the above, and that's what I do as a business, right? But understanding that I'm there, and I'll do anything for them, and I love them, I do care for them, they are valued, they do matter to me. That's the biggest one, because I know that they probably think that I don't, and it's a lot of how I'm built, and I've got to be better at how I'm built to be totally honest and own it, and have that ownership and accountability, responsibility for me as a father. I've got to be better as a father. And you know, you got to understand, I don't even know what that means. I've looked at people and seen things that they do, because I don't know what to do. I'm like, oh, do you want to grab a feed? Like, so that's you want to grab a feed, you want to grab a feed, you want to grab a feed. Oh, here's the football with my son, you want to go to the state of origin or something of that nature. And it is hard, you know, to connect, and because there's been so much disconnect, now we're at a level where it's just hard to reconnect, and you don't get that back, those missed days. And I say to them, you know, don't let it go too long. I'm trying, and I'll be in the space. I'm not going to be perfect at it, nor are you, about things you do in your life, but if we're committed to it, we'll eventually find a good bond in between. And I'd love that with my kids and grandkids, and them to have a good grandfather, and you know, the kids to have a good father that they never had. It'd be priceless to me, but more importantly, priceless to them. And that's what it, you know, to me, that's the ultimate gift and outcome from that whole conversation. And yeah, it's an uncomfortable one, but it's a real one, and it just shows you sometimes, you know, we own something, but we also go through something in between. For the message with the kids, please reach out and just have that combo, you know, and not just for me. If someone watches this and your father's put you through the same, reach out, have the combo, and help them build something that they've never seen or been, because we just don't know how to do it. My daughter's a better mother to her children. She's a beautiful mother, does anything for her kids, where I'm built where I'll do something if it's at a high level. So I had an incident, I'll go and sort it out because I can, but how can I be just an everyday dad, you know, picking up the grandkids, maybe going to watch them play football or netball or something of that nature, just simple stuff, and that's priceless. I want to talk about a child that was born without, you know, real planning behind it, to be honest with yourself. Old toxic behaviours behind it, which meant I slept with a mate at the time's partner, who they went through a bit of a breakup. We connected, something happened, child was born, and I'm not proud of it, brother. I'll be honest with you, because it's crazy. Everyone saw me as this person, Spaniard, hood superstar sleeping with your mate's partner, like twisted morals, values, beliefs, respect. To him, I felt he'd done something, I heard something, I was like, well, stuff you. You want to be like that, I'll be like that too. And it's just not how you operate. It's crazy. It's how we do operate in that world. That's the reality. He'd even say that. Mate, if he ever watches this, sorry brother, I honestly mean that from the bottom of my heart, because I'm built better now, I know how to be better. But at that point in time, I made a bad choice, and I own it, can't change it now. Daughter was born, she's beautiful, and I'm blessed, and you know, especially with the mother as well, she's a great mother. And same, I'm trying to be a great father to my daughter who's 8 now, and it's crazy that this come out of left field, and it wasn't planned, as I said, and it's hard. Same, they live distance, I live here. Trying to be a good father, I'm never here anyway. In that sense, is just crazy as well, and I don't want my kids to go through, well, you know, my 2 older kids have already gone through that. Now I've got a bit of an opportunity where she feels that she doesn't have a father in her life, and I'm trying to participate in that, or be a good father as best I can. And even then I can get better, you know, ringing up, texting every day, and letting her know that she matters, what happened in school, how, like those little things. I didn't see that from my father. People got to understand that, or my mother. And yeah, I don't know how to be that. So I am learning, I am committed to it, and it is important to me. I've learnt from the 2 kids prior, so I'm trying to be a better father to this child. But the thing with that, now my daughter sees that happening and says, what about me? What happened to our relationship? And I understand that as well. So it's just a whole bunch of things I need to navigate in rough seas, if you want to call it that. And it's challenging, man. It's just, especially you're trying to build a business, you travel the globe doing that, you travel the country doing that, you're not home, and now the time you've got is minimized, and that time needs to be split between 3 kids. And trying to build one relationship from the ground up with my son, trying to resurrect another one, and then trying to just be a good father in the one that I've got an opportunity in. It's just, you know, it's a challenge, I'll be honest. I'm great at most stuff. It's been my biggest challenge in my life so far and in recent times. And same thing, just look back on how you built this unconscious to conscious, how you're acting. Does it really serve you? Like, did that really serve me? And I mean that respectfully to my daughter. It wasn't a planned thing, so it means now I've got to navigate, or we've got to navigate, the mother and I, how to be the best mother and father to that child, even though we're separate, living distance and so forth. And most people will do that in life. You're attracted to someone, have a good night, and all of a sudden you've got a kid and two split parents. And some of them don't end as good as ours has. We've got a good relationship in the sense of being a good mother and father and role model to the kid, communicating right. But just, yeah, it's sad to me, brother. I'll be honest. Yeah, it's one thing that, and sometimes you try and push it aside, but pushing it aside means I forget about it. And then I say, no, you've got to actually go in and challenge yourself. So hard to navigate. What motivates me every day is when I was 16 years of age, I walked up the back lane of Eveleigh Street, Redfern. So it was called the Block. And it basically was 4 streets. There was a laneway through the middle, and you couldn't get up the laneway with a car. It was basically blocked off with some bollards, little sort of bollards. I walked up that lane from one end to the other, and what I saw was insane. There was kids crawling their syringes, people shooting up, people seeing those people shoot up, domestic violence, people out in the middle of the lane fighting, everyone cheering them on, blood spilling everywhere, cuts happening, and then in the background you got people drinking alcohol, drunk, been drinking for days, music loud, swearing everywhere. And I just remember getting to the top of that and saying to myself, this can't be how we live always. And I have to give context that Aboriginal people went through huge trauma, and for anyone out there that has judgment, it's easy to have judgment, but if you can't deal with your emotions, you'll do something. Eat food, drink alcohol, take drugs, be toxic in one way, shape or form, sleep with a lot of people to feel good or validated, those sorts of things. We were the same, and we were just at a high level because we were so insulated in this micro world. And I just remember saying, I want more. There's no way I'm going to be that. And my grandmother and my uncle would walk past, he'd slap me so hard and said, you be different, you be a warrior. And he'd had that, he was real feared within the family. He'd have that real toughness about himself. And as much as I cried, tongues and jaws quivering from being scared of this tough man. I gulp when I say that. He's probably looking down. It made me tough too, and it did make me head in a different direction and start to think differently. And my grandmother was saying, be different, finish school, son, promise me you'll finish school. And those sorts of things put me in a different direction because I respected my grandmother. I respected everyone, but I was fearful of my uncle, I was fearful of my father. Even those that, there was a bloke down there that got drunk every day in Redfern, but everyone loved him. And he taught me so many lessons, and I'll take those lessons. My grandmother taught me, carry the knowledge their spirit will forever walk this planet, so they never ever die. They keep, they're here, they're present, and we'd have good laughs. You'd be blind drunk, but he'd tell you stuff about what is being Aboriginal. Make sure you're proud about it. Do you know your totem? And he'd have these conversations that I never knew about. So I was very blessed at the same time. So as much as I talk about this fraction within the community, I also talked that there was some great stuff in the background. And who wouldn't want to be a part of, you could walk around the block and walk in someone's house and they'd invite you in and say, want to feed? So you couldn't do that. Try to do that in any suburb and the police will be called, you'll be thrown down on the ground, right? So we had that strength as well. So that as much as and then the resilience of that, going through that and coming through, it's insane. This baby's crawling and I'm looking and there's glass there, there's syringes there, there's rats running over there, and when people, look at the old photos, type in Eveleigh Street, I'll pass someone to you. I don't know if you can edit and put them into this clip, but just you'll see in these 2 photos that I pass on, or could pass on to anyone that reaches out. Just, it's crazy what we accepted, bro, as just as normal. And then at 16 I said, nah, enough's enough. And I started to change, shift. I served the 1 year, the 5 years, the 7 years in between, so 13 years just there alone. And for me, that got me to a point where I said, enough's enough, and I'm gonna shift and change, and I want more. And I don't want to see our community was being buried. That was the other thing, real early. And going back and seeing my mother buried, and then seeing the uncle I spoke about and his brother buried behind her. They were in their 50s when they were buried, and I was like, how? How did this happen, and what could I do differently? And that's what sort of was born, the new me, the new version of me, and off I went. My grandmother's my biggest inspiration. She taught me so much around values, I suppose, that I never had. I grew up and Dad was up the TAB, to be honest with you. Mum was drinking, or Mum was cooking food, and Mum was a great person, very calm. I took on that nature and I learned a lot from that, but she didn't say that much, and we didn't talk on the level of, even that, having that relationship with my mother and father was twisted, because I'd get locked up. I was my own person. If I caught them, I wanted bail. And then I'd live at their house because I had to live at their house because of bail. But the only good thing it did for me is, I learned a lot from my parents in that sense as I got older, and I started to recognise who they were and what they tried to do for me as a kid. But my grandmother was that cornerstone: get to school, be different. She died when I was really young, which was unfortunate. She was huge. She was massive to me. So, and I know that that's something that's not just myself, but those that have been lucky enough, whether it's in the Aboriginal community or non-Aboriginal community, to have a grandmother and be able to learn off them. From my father's side, I never met my grandmother or grandfather. And I was always sad, like I used to not worry about it when I was a kid. Who cares? They're old in my head, but I wish I'd met them, and they taught me about the history of our family over there, and that's where you connect to yourself, and that's when you start to really go from unconscious to conscious. Hey, who am I? And what does my culture mean to me? And what does culture even mean that you can build into yourself, where strength and pride and connection to who you truly are starts from, and then you start to build into that through these other elements or pillars of life: relationships, financials, quality of life. And all of a sudden you become a different version of yourself. But she was huge, and I'm forever grateful. My goals moving forward are about 1,000 employees from 500 different Aboriginal language groups, one male, one female. The idea of it is to live, breathe, teach, preach the healthiest version of yourself. When I say that, it's not just about fitness. This is about your thoughts, behaviours, beliefs, toxic relationships, values, morals, respect, connection to culture, all these elements of life. Financially, are you surviving or are you thriving? Stepping into business, maybe it's around culture, maybe it's around something different, right? Without judgment, total accountability, responsibility, ownership, and you become this absolute beast. That's what I've become, other than with my kids, right? So how do I work on that relationship side and be the best version as I move through it? But to be able to employ 1,000 people in these communities and then buy back the local supermarkets, and the idea of it is to create black excellence, build houses on blocks of land. And those houses, whether you're coming off drugs, whether you've been through domestic violence, whether you want to go to uni, start a sporting career, or do something, maybe it's an elder within the community, someone teaching language, where they can live rent-free, but be able to go through a period until they feel they're set up enough to actually then become a beacon within the community. And if we can get 20 of those on each different community across Australia, for me that would be unbelievable. To leave that legacy behind, a Jeffrey Morgan Foundation that builds those black excellence hubs and allow our people to then go out and thrive and create the wealth that we missed out on. And wealth isn't just financially, it's about how you just feel within yourself. You've got to imagine that 12-year-old kid and how I felt. And being on the streets of Sydney, you go and do that as a male, 2 o'clock in the morning. Go and do that as a female, I doubt you'll do it, right? Imagine a 12-year-old kid, and how I was built so hyper vigilant and then violence as a kid. And you got to understand, I'm a 12-year-old kid. I'm not stupid. I'm not going to fight a big bloke. So guess what? I'll pick up something and I'll hit you with it. And it built some greatness into me in the sense of I could protect myself now, and no matter what would happen or come at me, I feel that I'd be best equipped. And that should be probably something every person should learn. You know, you look at a Bondi incident as an example, and it might have helped out in a situation. And I've seen one bloke who actually turned, confronted him, and he had nothing, and the bloke actually diverted. So what could we do to be that strong version, but without violence? Just saying, hey, you know, we don't want any hassle, leave us alone, mate, and how can we best help yourself? And I know people will always get at you and say, that's not real. It's how in jail you got no choice. Someone comes at you, you're gonna stand up to that person. So as much as people say, that's bullshit, mate, you wouldn't do that. In jail, we had no choice. In Redfern, we had no choice. And sometimes that meant it was a police officer on the other side of that. And we had no fear in what we were doing. You got to understand, we're attacking a police officer who has a gun on his side, and we had absolute no fear around it, and we could have got shot dead in that moment. And when you get to that level of operation, you step past fear and anxiety, and you step into creation. And creation means you design the life you want. And as long as you can look at it and say, is it truly serving me? Is it functional or dysfunctional? And if it's functional towards who you want to be, keep making those right choices. If it's dysfunctional, how do you shift and change that? And even for me on a relationship level, so I build myself better as a father, I'm looking at people when I'm going to football or, you know, seeing a father with their kid. Some people might find this weird, but for me, I'm just watching that interaction between them both and what he actually says to the kid, or how he treats, let's go over here, stay close to me, whatever it is, right? Because I just want to learn. I didn't have that in my space, and you know, it's something that I definitely love to earn moving forward. But 1,000 workers, yes, that means 500 different language groups. You probably get 300 centres across this nation times 20. And to me, that would be an unbelievable journey. You know, 6,000 different houses that we could put black excellence into and start to design a better future. And it won't only be for the Aboriginal community, but now we've got people of black excellence going out into the community and interacting with non-Aboriginal people and creating a better life. And we live longer and stronger together, and we're not buried at 50 like my uncles were.